Yehudi Menuhin first performed with Furtwängler in 1947.
This most beautiful of places in violin literature will remain forever associated, for me, with Wilhelm Furtwängler. He knew how to create magic. Of course, the magic is already in the music, but the interpreter, fortunately, has a great part to play before that music becomes communicable to the world. It is something that will never leave me, this memory of playing this concerto and a few others with him, unfortunately not all the others, because he could recreate, because his mind and his spirit were not only bordered, as it were, by the score. They brought a whole world to the score.
He kept most of his original creativeness within his capacity for interpretation, for re-creation.
It is about his interpretations and his style of conducting that one of the two main controversies about Furtwängler revolved. Hans Keller, musician and writer.
He has been criticized for imprecision. The criticism is justified, but the evaluation isn't. Which is to say that where Furtwängler was imprecise, he not only wanted to be, but the composer wanted him to be. Let me give you one example. First, a performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony under Toscanini. I wasn't there myself, but I gather that as soon as the introductory bars, Furtwängler, who was there, jumped up from his seat, shouted bloody time beater, and left the concert hall. What had happened, what had aroused him so, was that Toscanini took the opening sextuplets very precisely, so that you could hear them as sextuplets. Now comes the other part of the story, and that is Furtwängler's own performance of the opening of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. There you couldn't hear a thing. You certainly couldn't hear sextuplets. What you could hear was a vague, tense noise. The beginning before the beginning, as it were, which is exactly what Beethoven had intended it to be.
Furtwängler's tempi also often aroused disagreement.
It's generally said that Furtwängler took very slow tempi. This is really what you mean. Well, sometimes he did and sometimes he didn't. Quite often he took far faster tempi than other people. Well, that is so fast a tempo that if you put it in the abstract, to anybody, if you asked any musician whether the movement was possible at this speed, he would say no. And that would include myself before I had heard the Furtwängler performance, which, however, only goes to show that tempo in itself is nothing. Tempo is a function of structure, and hence in performance a function of phrasing. You can't decide on a tempo before A, you have experienced the structure, and if you are a listener, before you have experienced the phrasing of the interpreter in question.
Furtwängler himself answered his critics in relation to his performances of Beethoven.
I should not take these tempi if I were not convinced that they were the tempi of Beethoven. The long and the short of it is that an interpreter can render only what he has first lived through. A formula for the correct rendering of everything. No, there isn't such a thing.
Furtwängler also frequently included in his symphonic programs works which he conducted from the piano.
When one thinks of such things as the cadenza in Brandenburg 5, well, never again, I think, will we hear this being composed as it is when he plays it.
Why should classical style be synonymous with boredom? It is untrue to say that Bach has less soul than Puccini. In the case of one, the soul is exposed. In the case of the other, it is within.
You may know Robert Schumann's reaction to the then current opinion that Schubert's longer works were of heavenly length. Schumann argued they were not of heavenly length, they were of heavenly length. I think Schumann would have called Furtwängler's tempi heavenly slow.
The years 1922 to 1933 were perhaps the happiest of his career as a conductor. The Philharmonic concerts had an impact far beyond Berlin, far beyond Germany. Foreign tours took on an unprecedented scope and importance. There were visits to England, Switzerland, Holland, Austria, Italy, Scandinavia, France. At the beginning of this period, in 1923, Furtwängler married a Danish woman, Siedler Lund. Women had always played a part in his life, even though his private existence appeared to take second place to his professional life as a musician. Jascha Horenstein was Furtwängler's assistant for the Frankfurt Music Festival in 1927.
But he was like a lion in a cage, a hungry lion in a cage, on an evening when he was not conducting. This may be the reason that you would say that private life did not exist for him, only his professional life, because he was really, he could not stand one day without having worked, having rehearsed or conducted. This may be the reason that he gave the impression that there was no private life for him. But this was not so. Private life was still very important for him, maybe too important in some period of his life.
In 1927, Furtwängler was appointed permanent conductor of the Vienna Philharmonic, a post he held for 3 years, although he always kept a close artistic contact with the orchestra. Many honors came his way, including an honorary doctorate from Heidelberg and the German equivalent of the Order of Merit. He'd already conducted twice in the United States. By his early 40s, Furtwängler had achieved world fame. When the existence of Bayreuth seemed threatened after the death of Siegfried Wagner, it was Furtwängler who was called in. He didn't shrink from this challenge, despite many doubts, and he kept returning to the festival town right up to the end of his life. But this period of achievement and success was interrupted in 1933 by events which had repercussions throughout the musical life of Germany and plunged Furtwängler into the second major controversy of his life, one which to this day still scars his reputation. On January the 30th, the Third Reich was proclaimed. Hitler had come to power.
Es ist unser Wunsch und Wille, dass dieser Staat und dieses Reich bestehen sollen in den kommenden Jahrtausenden. Wir können glücklich sein zu wissen, dass diese Zukunft restlos uns gehört.
Furtwängler was now Germany's foremost conductor, and it seemed to him inconceivable that his position in the world of art could be undermined by political events. But the impact of the new regime soon made itself felt. Besides the musicians who were forced to leave, others left because they couldn't bear to stay. Increasing attempts were made to interfere with musical activities, and in particular to use the Berlin Philharmonic and Furtwängler as a respectable front to the Nazi regime.